the education of family and community actors against violence in schools, causes and possible solutions. Allow me first of all to react to the previous plenary and the conviction as a member of the Supreme or the High Council for Education, Sama Balarash. The previous plenary talks about the climate school or school climate and the impact on the emotional, and we talked also about harassment throughout the world, and also the position, the geographical position where we are. Harassment is a serious topic, especially with the social media use. Of course, intimidation, harassment, and so on. There are a lot of actors, family, education staff, and so on, and family. So these three elements have to interact together to find complementary solutions between brackets. So the aspects of the players, namely the teachers, have to have a kind of logical monitor and follow up of this problematic. So I'm pleased to have this partnership between the High Council for Education and UNICEF to talk about this, because the numbers are worrying. That's why we have to react, and these figures have to mobilize all of us and send us signs of alarming signs that we have to work about this issue. It's in the news today. We cannot be able to create society together, but we have to work. We may not be able to make society alone, but we'll make it together. There's a lot of impact for the death of a child than the death of a parent, and it's the responsibility as adults to conduct public policies necessary to provide solutions. The families have a role; they have to be responsible for their children. And the responsibility of the teachers and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll try to be the guard of time, and a request from you to respect the time. I'll be a dictator in this direction. I'll be giving you 10 minutes with a little warning, a cellular warning. If you go beyond that for the 5 remaining minutes, well, I'm sure the participants have a lot of questions to ask, and we'll give them the floor by then. I'm going to name the speakers: Johan Harat, Chief of Health and Education Section at UNESCO; Hugh Salman, Director of the Global Social Services Workforce Alliance in London, United Kingdom; Abdelwadud Kharbouch, who is Psychology Professor, Faculty of Education Science, Mohammed V University, member of the Higher Council of Education, Training and Scientific Research. We'll have Lynn Rasmussen, Coordinator of Safe to Learn Social Behavior Change, Specialist in the Education Section of the at UNICEF, New York, USA. So you have the headsets, and make sure you tune in for the interpretation. I would request from you to respect the time, the allotted time. If I stop you, it's that I follow the rules. Thank you very much. Go ahead. The floor is yours, Joanna. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I would like to thank you first of all for the invitation. The UNESCO is so thrilled to be amongst you today. If you allow me, we talked about 12 minutes. A question of the interpreting or something. So I'll move to English because it's my mother tongue. In order to talk about these sensitive topics, I have to switch to English, and sorry for not presenting neither French or Arabic.
I will talk today about understanding forms of violence, but actually, we've already had this conversation. All of yesterday, we spoke about the data that we know about, 246 million children a year experiencing violence, 1 in 3 children reporting experiencing bullying at some point in the last year. We also heard the excellent report produced by the Conseil Supérieur, and I really do applaud the Conseil for producing this report. It's one of the few countries, I think you are one of the few countries in the world that has invested in such a significant report on the state of violence in your schools. So really, chapeau, bravo. It's a really excellent report, and I think it is a really important first step in understanding the problem so that then we can move on to identifying solutions and ways forward. This region of North Africa has the second highest prevalence of bullying in the world overall at around 42%, and very high levels amongst boys of 46%, and also girls. We all have heard violence in schools is a reflection of violence and power dynamics in the wider society. So schools are not alone, they are not islands, they are part of the community, but they are also places where change can happen. So let's think about what schools can do for change. So we've heard data and we've heard definitions, and we heard from children and young people yesterday. But sometimes when we hear about data, we forget that we're talking about real people. And the experience of violence is an experience that's a human experience, and that's why we need to act on it, the suffering that is experienced. And so I will share with you 3 brief examples, and these are taken from some of the materials which we use in the curricula in some schools in different parts of the world, and they are based on the real-life experiences that young people have told us about through our consultations. So for example here, we have a young girl, Claire, who is 12. During the holidays, her body has changed. In the first week back at school, 2 boys in her class repeatedly point at her chest and make signs, and they're laughing and trying to bump against her, to touch her, and even to pull her bra. She started to wish that she had never, ever come back to school. Abel, 15 years old. He's been summoned to the headmaster's office for making noise. It's not the first time, and so the head teacher says, "I'll make an example of you." He takes him back to the classroom, and in front of all of his peers, he beats him hard with a cane, telling him to take it like a man. So here what we're seeing is the physical violence, but also the humiliation in front of an audience of his peers in school. This final example, a young girl, Rita, urgently needs to use the toilet. But there are no toilets in her school, they're damaged, and so the female students usually go in the nearby bushes. A group of boys go to watch her. They follow and they watch her as she lifts her skirt. She doesn't know they're there. One of the boys sees what they're doing, but he decides not to join them, and he returns to class unsure. Should he say something? Should he do something? What can he do in this situation? So what we can see, and what we heard this morning as well from the presentations from our colleagues and also yesterday, there's many different kinds of bullying, of violence, of sexual violence, of psychological violence. We at UNESCO use this conceptual framework to describe what we understand violence in schools to include. It's physical violence, which could be physical attacks, fights, corporal punishment, destroying property. But that also merges with psychological violence, because these are never separate, these issues. They're always overlapping. So we have to think about psychological violence like verbal abuse, emotional abuse, exclusion, and bullying, which is a term that we've heard a lot about today. There's also the issue of sexual violence, and this is often the most underreported because it's the most shameful for some people, it's the most sensitive, and it's the most difficult to collect data on in an ethical manner in the school environment. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. I'm from the UK, and I saw a report last year from the National Inspector Body, where they ask the questions on school quality. They ask girls, have you had experience in the last year of anybody making unwanted sexual comments, or where you have received sexualized photos or someone has sent them? 9 out of 10 girls in England said that this had happened to them. No one had ever asked them before. And then they said, did you tell a teacher? And they said, of course not. It's so normal. This happens all the time. Why would we tell anyone? It's just what we have to live with. But I think the question we should ask ourselves is, Why should you have to live with that? It's not normal, it's not healthy, and it doesn't help us to create equal and successful societies. So this conceptual framework views all of these different forms of violence together: sexual violence, physical violence, psychological violence. We also know that different factors influence violence, different driving forces behind violence, especially in school. So if we want to be successful in preventing and responding to violence, we have to take all of these factors into consideration. And here we look at gender, and this we understand to be one of among the most significant driving factors behind violence. Also, ability, learners with disabilities or different levels of ability. There's a lot of evidence to show that they are far more at risk of violence. And we heard from one of the colleagues speaking yesterday, at risk of violence and being involved in violence. Migrant status, people coming from different countries, refugee status, ethnicity, also socioeconomic status. I'm sure everybody here has seen or heard stories about a child who is teased at school or excluded because they're poor. And also sexual orientation. The final point I want to make about what we think about when we think about school violence is that it's happening in and around schools. And that's why this panel is excellent, because we will be able to talk about the way to school, the home life, community, and cyberspace. I believe we've heard a lot about the impact of violence on learners. It's a violation of the right to education, first and foremost. It leads to higher levels of school dropout. It reduces academic achievement, which also is going to have an impact on future generations. And I think we're all in this room committed to improving the quality of education, not decreasing it. So we need to act on those things that are reducing education. But we carried out a research 2 years ago with teachers, and it made us realize that many schools are really not ready to act yet. So, for example, 25% of the teachers surveyed did not recognize certain common forms of violence as being violence. Things like hitting a student. There were teachers who were saying, no, I don't see that as violence. Equally, only 30% of teachers said that they had received training on how to prevent and respond to violence. So there's a big gap and we need to work, and I'm going to focus a little on that now. But first, we've heard a little bit about these holistic approaches. We've heard a little bit today and yesterday about these multi-component ways of looking at the world. We need to embrace complexity. Let's not be simple and one line only. Let's embrace complexity. So for UNESCO and many of our other colleagues in the UN system, we have used the evidence to define what we call a whole school response or a whole education response. And these 9 components, and you will see them presented in different ways in different documents, really together create the conditions to end violence in schools. So the first thing we need to think about is the political leadership and a robust legal and policy framework. We're sitting here together at the Conseil Supérieur. We're in a very good position to see that there is political engagement, there is leadership. Let's continue with that. The second thing is the training and support for teachers and other staff. So this shift in mindset to teach in a learner-centered way and to recognize violence when it happens and to know that they can do something to act on it. And I think we've had different presentations, and I will come back to this question of teachers. The third piece, and I recall that this is really all meant to be seen together. This isn't a menu where we can pick an entree and pick a dessert. We really need to see all of this together. The third piece is about curriculum and learning. You definitely have space in your curriculum in Morocco for life skills, for civics education, for social and emotional learning. Maybe there needs to be some time taken to look at that curriculum and check that it is up to date and it meets international recommendations and the vision you have for your future society. But I'm sure there's already place in there for some of those transformations to happen so that children can learn about their rights, so that they can learn about violence and recognize what it is, and that they can also think about what to do if they experience it or if they witness it, which is also very important. So this curriculum work is critical. We've talked about the psychological and classroom environment, and I think what we heard this morning from our colleague Claire Beaumont on school climate is really critical. I won't repeat that, but it's critical. And within that, you need to have a reporting mechanism. If a child experiences violence, who do they go to? Who is the trusted adult? Is there maybe a box where they can put an anonymous complaint about something that's happened? Who opens that box and who reads it? How does that reporting happen at the school level? We need to make sure at the school level that we're involving teachers, learners, we're involving the head teacher who often sets the tone for the school, and the parents association, if you have a parents association.
2 minutes.
Thank you. And the board of governors, if you have a board of governors. All of those parties need to be rowing in the same direction to say we want to end violence and we will take on these actions to do that. We heard yesterday from young people. I hope we continue to do that because the empowerment of learners is critical. The next point, number 8, is collaboration and partnerships. And that as well, we see that between child protection, health, education, as the first 3 partners usually, maybe also women's affairs and others, but seeing the links that we can make is going to be critical. And finally, and this is what I started with, is evidence. And you have evidence in your country, you can already move ahead. So, I want to share some examples. I hope this may be useful. It's from 2016, but it's still very relevant, and it's on gender-based violence in schools, and it presents a whole school approach. Please feel free to flash the code. And it presents a lot of evidence and examples of how to respond to violence in schools with a gender lens, but it is relevant for all forms of violence. We also have documented from countries, in this case, all across sub-Saharan Africa, many different social contexts. Can I have one more minute? Many different social contexts and religious contexts, work that has happened at country level, either by governments or by NGOs. We've documented the examples of what they did on teachers, on the whole school approach, on monitoring, on curricula, and community engagement. So I encourage you to look at that, and I apologize for the moment they're in English, but maybe we could look to doing some translations. I mentioned teachers. We also have some work on teachers. We know that teachers are often committed but don't know how to end violence. So what we have learnt, and I want to share this with you specifically because I think it's the one thing we haven't discussed very much so far. What do teachers need in order to respond to violence? The first thing they need is a safe space to take on their own reflection, a reflective practice that allows them to consider their own values vis-a-vis society, vis-a-vis violence, and vis-a-vis gender. And then we need work and training to build teachers' empathy and their confidence. If a teacher does not know well the skills to manage a classroom without using violence, they have to learn a new methodology, a positive approach to discipline and school climate. And we also know that if teachers are going to make a change in schools, they really need to be supported by one another. So teachers have to be in connection with one another to learn from one another. There is an example of how you can engage teachers' unions, and that has been incredibly effective in many countries.
Can you conclude, please, Shona?
Yeah, thank you. So teachers' unions, that can be very, very effective, but it can take time, and so you need to look at 1 or 2 years of collaboration. So, to close, today is the International Day Against Violence in Schools, including bullying and cyberbullying. I think you already know that. I really welcome you to share through your social media networks. There are many different messages that are being shared. This year, we're focusing on mental health and the links between violence and mental health. This is a one-off. Sometimes it's important to do a one-off campaign to speak loudly, and we do it every year at the beginning of November. But really the work we have ahead of us here in Morocco is the ongoing regular work together as a group of partners rather than one-off campaigns. But let me assure you, it has been done in other countries. It is absolutely possible, and there are many success stories, and I look forward to hearing more and sharing them with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. You had your 14 minutes, so you have respected your time. Thank you very much. So now I'm not going to sum up your presentation, of course, to gain time. So you, please.
So while the slides have changed, in case you're wondering why this rude Englishman is wearing no tie, I was forced to wear a tie from the age of 5 to 18 because of the school I went to. And I don't know why. I still don't know why. I'm much prouder of this badge. I want to wear this instead because I think somebody's... Have I got microphone? No. This badge is a badge of honor. I'm really impressed by your conference today. It's the first event of this type that I've been to, and I'll remember it for a long time. So this is the one I wear with real pride, as opposed to the thing that makes me feel like I can't breathe. Okay. Let's see. So I'm going to start with a story, a rather tragic story from my own country, but it could happen in any country. And I want you to think about whether it could happen in your country or whether it already happens in your country. There's a child called Daniel who was invisible. He was invisible when he should have been seen and saved. He died in a large English city, aged 4, in 2012, after suffering prolonged abuse and neglect by his parents. Just to let you know, I'm changing gear a little bit. I hope it's allowed. From the school to the role of the school in wider child protection. Okay, so that's why we're talking about Daniel, because he suffered prolonged abuse and neglect by his parents. A serious... Oh, I haven't pressed start on this thing, sorry. Okay, now I start. Reprendre? Okay, now my time has started. Okay.
Already 1 minute 30.
Oh, no. Okay. He suffered prolonged abuse and neglect by his parents, as a result of which he died. The great thing about that's tragic, and it happens far too often, but the good thing about what happens in my country is when really tragic cases happen, there is a public inquiry, and then we all learn from the lessons. This inquiry found that Daniel was invisible at many times, and no professional tried enough to talk to him. He was starved and beaten for months before he died, and he saw a doctor in hospital for a broken arm, and he arrived at school with bruises and facial injuries, and at school he was seen scavenging for food. He was searching for morsels of food in his school. A teaching assistant described him as a bag of bones. At his parents' trial, experts said that for months he'd been wasting away, and at the time of his death, the 4-year-old was just over 10 kilos. Police were called 26 times to the family home, often because of incidents of domestic violence or alcohol abuse. But professionals were still not intervening. They didn't think the unthinkable about what might be happening, and they accepted instead the parent explanation of what's happening. So his voice was not heard. English was not his first language. He was only 4, and he lacked confidence. But that is no excuse. No record was ever made of any conversation held with him, and conversations with children often don't involve words. They involve play and drawings. None of that was recorded. And so we didn't know about his home life, his experiences outside school, or his family relationships. There were attempts by the school to deal with what they could see. What they could see was health and behavioral issues. In the months before his death, they did not know that his life was at risk. So too many opportunities were missed. Twice he was admitted to hospital, but the explanation given by his parents for those injuries was accepting. It was accepted by the doctors. The review said that Daniel could have been offered greater protection if the professionals involved had applied a much more inquiring mind. Not a judgmental mind, but an inquiring mind. It also identified that school staff did not link Daniel's physical injuries with their concerns about his apparent obsession with food, and they accepted his mother's explanations for that. So his mother was a convincing manipulator. We have something that we call disguised compliance. She appeared to be complying with what professionals said, but it was a disguise for abuse happening at home. So there was an idea, the judge said ultimately, that Daniel was invisible, and that was the problem at the heart of this case. Now, he would not have been invisible if the school had played its part. There were multiple failings, but the school had a crucial role. So schools are about preventing violence, not only in the school, but in the family and in the community. I'll step back a bit and describe who I am. I run a global alliance which is there for the social service workforce, which at the heart of which are professional social workers. But as you can see under the umbrella, there are a range of different people, and you can see names I'm sorry that it's only in English, but you will know in Morocco that there are many different titles for people that provide social services at different levels, NGO or government. And so this is an umbrella workforce. It is a collective workforce of many different types of people that does include social workers and other specialists that is working both on prevention and on response, both at the local level and at the national level and at the community level. Now here you can see, again I'm afraid in English, some examples of the titles given to people who work in schools or linked to schools to try and prevent another Daniel case happening, or to work with the daily incidents of violence and bullying that we've been talking about. You often have a school director or deputy director who is responsible to be that link, that point of connection, communication with the child protection system. You may have somebody else responsible for student welfare. You may have a school counselor or a professional psychologist. In my country, we've got about 100 years of having attendance officers or educational welfare officers, but they're often really focused on attendance as that particular statistics that the director wants to get above 90%, rather than necessarily looking at the whole picture. But ideally, they do look at the whole picture. In some countries, you have social pedagogues, which is a particular discipline relevant for the education sector, but looking at the social environment. And you also have school social workers, and you have child protection social workers linked to schools, not necessarily working in the school every day. But all of those do not substitute for the whole school approach, which I think has been a wonderful part of what everybody's been talking about so far. So the two things go hand in hand. The whole school approach that involves the students, the parents, and the staff, but also specialists who are trained to pay particular attention to these issues. The next few slides I'll go through super quick because they've mostly been covered before. But the case of Daniel reminds us that schools are not just places of learning, they're also critical spaces to identify and then address violence against children. We see the evidence, we can respond. So children spend a lot of time, so it's a unique opportunity to intervene and help children. And schools have an obligation to protect children. They have an obligation not just to teach children and to help them learn, but to protect them from all form of violence, and whichever come to their attention in the school. So that is an international norm and a right. So we need to be addressing child protection in schools in order also to achieve educational outcomes, as we heard, and also to help countries achieve their sustainable development goals. So this stuff is relevant for the Minister of Economy as much as it is for the Minister of Finance. These things are important for the overall nation. And so we need to have a wider approach, exactly as Joanna was just saying. We need to have a system that connects the school with a wider child protection system. So we need to have trained and supported school staff. So the problem when we've done studies on this is that the school staff often say, okay, we get it, but do you know how busy we are? Do you know how crowded the timetable is? I can't just do this extra thing that you've given me. So we have to think about that. We have to, and other speakers have spoken about that very eloquently, but I think there is a need to add somebody in the school who has a particular focus on student welfare, who may be a social worker or a counselor, but we also need to try and give something that is embedded in all the training of the teachers. It's not an extra lesson for the child. It shouldn't be an extra lecture in their pedagogical training at university either. It should be embedded in the way that they are taught overall as teachers. That's just what I'm gathering from listening to the rest of you. And so we need to integrate the social service workforce. Very often, social services exists in a very separate silo from education, but that workforce works across those barriers. So we need to have systems that have systems of communication, of sharing information. We're very worried about data protection and confidentiality. Yes, but in Daniel's case, the parents would be very happy with all that confidentiality because it would enable them to continue to hide. Confidentiality should not let child abusers hide. There is a need to know basis, and that need to know basis should have been invoked in that case to share information across the hospital, the police, and the school, and that did not happen. And confidentiality and data protection is not an excuse. We need to share information to protect children. So we need to integrate the workforce in school. We need a multi-stakeholder, holistic approach. And so I'm going to come to the end very quickly because there's one slide I want to dwell on before I finish. But clearly we need to advocate for effective professionalization of the workforce in school, working with the social service workforce. Now, this is the final slide that I want to finish on. And this is thinking again about Daniel. Let's all, as professionals, we need to engage three things: our heads, our hearts, and our hands. We need to do stuff, we need to feel stuff as well as think stuff. So let's feel a little bit about what happened to Daniel. And let's think a little bit about what could have made a difference, and if that happened in Morocco, and then apply that in practice with our hands. And I think that one thing, this slide looks a bit nerdy, a bit technical. What this slide is looking at is that there are multiple ways to have social workers connected to schools. The first way is to have a social worker linked to a school or a cluster of schools, but still employed by a social services department. Now that has advantages, but it might be that if the head teacher is just given somebody who they don't pay for and don't manage, they will not take that person seriously. And in many countries, the so-called social worker or social pedagogue in the school ends up being given another role. Could you clean the playground? Could you count a list of children who are going to go to Independence Day parade? What? What's that got to do with social work? Shut up, Mr. Director. You have a social worker in your school. Use her as a social worker, please. So that's a problem with option number one. Sorry, I would never say shut up, Mr. Director, normally. I just wanted to keep us all awake because it's nearly lunchtime. Okay, number two, we could have the social service workforce employed by the school and placed in the school, but still managed by someone from social services. I'm a social worker, and I have been for 30 years, and I like to be supervised by a social worker. And because the social worker understands the kind of complex cases I'm dealing with, and I need to talk to that social worker on a daily basis. The failure of supervision for the workforce
2 minutes left.
is often the reason that children like Daniel die when they shouldn't, because social workers saw something, but they didn't know what to do with it because they didn't have a chance to talk it through with their manager. So we need to have a supervised workforce, which is not just instructed and monitored, but is helped to deal with complex cases. So if I am under the management of the director of the school, I respect you, Mr. Director. Thank you for giving me my role as a social worker, but I'd also like to be supervised by someone who is a specialist in social work. And finally, you might have a case where everything comes under the school or everything comes under the social services. So all I'm trying to say in this final slide is that there are multiple options to get social workers who are normally stuck in social work offices. And unfortunately in Morocco, dare I say it, I have heard that a lot of the public social workers actually are not entitled under the current law to actually work in the communities and with families. It's only the NGOs that currently do that. But the public social workers should absolutely be visiting families and working in the community. If I'm a social worker behind my desk, 90% of the time, I am not a social worker. Full stop. So we need to think how these social workers can work in the community and how the school is an ideal place for them either to be located or linked. Thank you very much.
Thank you for respecting your time. Si Kharbouch, 3 minutes.
Mr. Kharbouch, 3 minutes. In the name of Allah, most merciful, most compassionate. In fact, what I was aiming to present is a fieldwork study. It's a study called ICAST, very well known internationally. ICAST study means SPCAN. SPCAN is the International Association for the Prevention of Violence Against Children, Child Abuse and Neglect. ICAST is the SPCAN child abuse screening tools that is about measuring violence in countries. This study was done, I did it at our Center for the Protection of Children, which took place in Marrakesh at the University of Marrakesh, Qadi Ayad. And the center has moved to the University of Mohammed V in Rabat. The study is the second study in this protection center. The second one is about the experience of negative experiences, negative experiences in children. And it's a study that is a worldwide study. It, it, it has been adapted to the Moroccan environment. I could have make a comparison between ACA study and the study carried out by this council, higher council, but I was, for time constraints, I was asked to talk about the roots of violence and the causes and the ways and means for protection. I worked on this issue, and we have in the Arab world, Arab SPCAN, which is the Arab Association for the Prevention of Violence Against Children. We work on training and guidelines, manuals to deal with violence and to work on prevention from violence. I won't study a lot. I won't talk a lot about these studies, but today we talked about the 4 types of violence: physical, sexual, psychological, and neglect violence. There are many terms used, such as hurting, maltreatment, aggression, hurting, harming. There are many concepts, but we need to unify these concepts. I participated in 2005 with the United Nations study, and his special envoy, Paulo Sergio Bino, who asked in this study to unify the terms. We need to talk about violence against children in general terms, and even for harassment. Harassment is part of sexual violence, is part of the sexual violence in general. The figures are quite close between ICAST and the Higher Council study. The sexual violence, the study didn't talk about ICAST, but ICAST showed that there are all kinds of sexual violence against children, such as voyeurism, nudism, and full sexual relationship with children, and to subject children to pornographic pictures and videos for psychological violence. I always link all phenomena that happen at school to violence. A few 7 years back, I was responsible for a master about school violence at the university. It was targeting school psychologist specialist. I gave also a special module about school violence. But violence is the reason, is the root of all phenomena, of all problems, which pushes students to drop out and also pushes students to regress in learning, and causes learning disorders, and causes everything that you know at schools. It would be enough to give you one example to qualify a student as dumb, and that he's lazy, and that he will not do anything in his life. He will not do much in his life. He will not achieve anything. That's what we say in Morocco. This is the rudest form of violence, and all psychologists and experts have agreed that this impact, that is this psychological hurting of the child, this will make the child feel unable psychologically. When you tell him such things, he will believe that he is really deficient, and this will lead to his either dropping in his school performance. And when you compare children with other children, this really causes in children psychological shocks. And psychological shocks that are caused by violence are quite serious and grave and dangerous. In this room, when we started this conference yesterday, everybody remembered the situations of violence to which he or she was subject at school. And shocks at school are always there with children, and they are stored in the area that's close to language. This cannot be surmounted unless the child is treated psychologically. And there are other forms of violence, that is, you expose children to violence, either marital household violence, or in the street, or on TV, or on social medias. This is one of the most serious forms of violence. In any way, I'm not going to deal with the results of the study. I will move straight away, because the moderator is pushing me, and he's quite firm and nasty, more than nasty. And so I'm going to limit myself to the time allotted to me and respect him. As to the roots and causes of violence, I could have liked to present this presentation with the previous moderator of the previous session. As I was saying, how can we explain violence, or what is the best way? From my own opinion, there is the environmental or ecological model that presents this form, because the causes of violence cannot be referred to or explained by one single cause. There are many causes, started from individual causes to relationship causes to social causes. The individual one is clear, the relationship one is clear, but the social one and the community one, the community violence is what I mean, but the social one is social violence. And to distinguish between them, when you talk about communities, these are small societies inside neighborhoods. But when we talk about the social, it's the whole country, or the reigning culture in a given region, such as the Arab region, or the Scandinavian region, or the African region, and so on. What are the causes of violence? For the individual causes, there are causes linked to the violated and the violator, the victim and the aggressor, or the victims. All children can be subject to violence without exceptions, because the child is vulnerable, weak in front of adults, that is incapable, and weak and vulnerable in front of adults, in the street, at school, at home, and also unable to defend himself. But there are other characteristics that would push or cause violence in children, such as mental retardation disorders, mental disorders, hyperactivity in children, and so on. There are certain learning disorders in children, and many teachers do not know anything about learning disorders. But we're not asking teachers to be psychologists. It would be enough to be a psychologist or a specialist in psychology at school, and there could be a specialist at school that would help teachers to uncover and discover and detect learning disorders early in a child. We understand from this that there are certain causes of the violence in children. This does mean that we are justifying violence against children. As to the aggressors, those who aggress children physically or psychologically, in addition to sexually, the aggressors have certain psychological characteristics. He's an aggressor, he's an addicted, he's a despot, and he's always feeling unhappy, and he's oversensitive. He's oversensitive to daily constraints and stress. He doesn't accept disappointment. He doesn't know how to deal with children. He doesn't understand the needs and capacities of children, and he has higher expectations from children. And when he doesn't find such expectations, he exerts violence against children, especially teachers and parents. He has deficient knowledge of children, considering that the child is a minor and he's a property for the others. There are other characteristics concerning addiction to drugs, and also in a pathological records of the child. The introverted people who prefer isolation, social isolation, and do not communicate with the others, and they don't have any capacity to face stress and disappointment, and do not communicate with children, such as parents who do not communicate with children, commit more violence than the parents who are close to their children and listen to their children continuously. They don't know the ways of controlling anger and tension. They don't know how to face anger and so on. For social causes, here it's about families and communities, the dislocated relationship, divorce, negative methods of education and raising the children. There is a common concept in parents that violence is the best way for education and the best way to control the classroom and the best way to improve the educational level of children. However, it's the opposite. Violence does not lead to any of these good results. How do we accept violence as a culture and the culture of equality between gender equality and equality between the sexes, and also absence of social amenities and the widespread use of drugs and so on, and crime and so on. There are also general beliefs that glorifies violence against children and against women, and also the look at children and the place of children and the widespread presence of violence in games, on TVs, the absence of laws and policies and measures and programs to put an end to violence. 3 minutes for the causes of sexual violence. I'm talking about physical and psychological violence. However, psychological violence is something else. Those who aggress children sexually are most of them people who are in the close proximity of children. They are not strangers. Most of those who sexually exploit children are those who know them, who are close to them. Well, this can be explained by sexual psychological disorders. This is about desiring children, pedophilia. It's a sexual disorder. There are different kinds of pedophilia. There are the pedophiles who are long-term pedophiles, and there are also occasional pedophiles who aggress sexually children because the child happens to be at the wrong time and at the wrong place. But the chronic sexual aggressor is the person who continuously aggress children sexually, even if they were married and even if those children were from his own family. And this is need to be sanctioned and to be penalized by law, because we need to understand this thing. For who are the children that are most subject to sexual violence? All children are subject to sexual violence, but mostly male children in public places, in the streets. We in Morocco, we believe that the protection of female children more than we need to protect male children, because male children have the capacity to defend themselves. So girls need to be protected more than boys, because girls do not have the capacity to defend for themselves and defend themselves. So we need to educate children on sexual education, and there are training sessions in which we can train children to defend themselves against sexual aggressors and pedophiles. So we can also train children so that they can avoid violence, exploitation, or violence, or sexual violence or exploitation. As I said, for the ways and means for protection, many didn't talk about prevention. For prevention, I'm going to talk about the ways of prevention, methods of prevention, as I explained the roots and causes of violence. That is the social factors. We need to develop legislation in this regard. We need to prevent violence against children in any place, at any time. We need to train the parents, and we were talking about positive education. We need to train newly married people and those who will get married soon about parenthood. Parenthood is not easy. To drive a car requires training and a test and a driving license, but running a family needs training. there are certain countries that required a license for parenthood, so that the parents would know the needs and of the child and how to deal with the child. Teachers know everything about pedagogy and transmission of knowledge and how to teach children, but they not train on how to deal with children and and sanction alternatives. I can control my classrooms without exerting any violence on children through non-violent means and methods that we can apply to children. Also, at the level of society, to provide whistleblowing services and to provide the basic needs for children, medical, psychological, legal, and to provide surveillance in places of presence of children, such as parks, schools, the streets, because those who pedophiles choose jobs that are close to children in dealing with children, such as selling things at the door of the school. We need to sensitize on this culture, the culture of prevention for house visits. Among the most important things is to we need to call for the help of psychologists and psychological experts to detect early detection of violence and to sensitize them as to the best ways of dealing with children, and also family mediations and school mediations. And thank you for concluding, Professor. I will stop here. I will stop here. I don't want to bother you. Thank you. Thank you so much. He was fast, wasn't he? Yes, with your permission. All the details are present in this presentation. Presentation will be at your disposal at the Higher Council's administration. Thank you, Professor. Is Lynn ready? Lynn, where are you? Lynn Bago Rasmussen, are you ready, ma'am? You have the floor, ma'am. Hello, you have the floor, ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am. You can start. Yes, you can start, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Good morning, Lynn. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you
Yes,
hear me?
we can hear you as well. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lina. As just presented, I work for UNICEF. I lead a global initiative called Safe to Learn, and I'm also a social and behavior change specialist. I'm here today to speak to you about perspectives from Safe to Learn using social and behavior change approaches to advance inclusive and equitable quality education. I hope you hear me well, and I'm sorry I couldn't join you in Morocco this morning. Let's see if my slides are stuck somehow. Yasmin, maybe you have to move the slides from your end. They're not moving for me, sorry.
We have a technical issue here, so please hold on.
Okay. Is it working now?
It sounds good, yes.
Okay, perfect. Let's hope that it moves fine from now on. So I wanted to start with this slide, and it actually links well to the presentation just now by Mr. Kabuch. I wanted to zoom in and look at what happens to a child when violence happens in a school setting, in all settings for that matter. We can look at it at many levels, but I want to highlight two levels here. The first one is at the mind and the brain level of the child. As I'm sure you've been discussing over the past 1.5 days, a child who has just been hit has a brain in shock mode and cannot learn. Corporal punishment has a very severe impact on the well-being of children and triggers harmful psychological and physiological responses, as we just had a presentation about. This obviously limits undermines the transformational power of education. I've heard already from listening in this morning how people have been describing, and I completely agree. It reduces school attendance, it lowers educational attainment, and it also leads many children to drop out of school. That in turn causes an increase in other harmful practices, such as child marriage and other protection concerns when children drop out of school. That brings me to the other side of the slide around the social environment and the consequences that violence in schools can have to the development of our wider society. Safe to Learn, together with the World Bank, have estimated that the economic cost of violence in and around schools is at 11 trillion lost in lifetime earnings. So if we want to talk about economic arguments, it's certainly there. It shouldn't be necessary, but it's a huge cost for their society. Then there's the cyclical nature of violence. We have evidence that boys who experience violence are more likely to perpetrate violence in adulthood, and girls are more likely to be victims of further violence later in life. So there are very harmful social and gender norms and key drivers of violence at play, which is really complex, which also means, and that's also how we work, both in Safe to Learn and in UNICEF, and with colleagues in the room, to really use a gender transformative approach to address violence in and around schools that builds on gender equality and inclusion. I've tried here just to delve a little bit further into the social and behavioral drivers of violence that I spoke to a bit before also. I already mentioned that child who've just been hit will have a brain in shock mode. There are other factors which I'm sure you've discussed as well. Sexual abuse was just mentioned. Child marriage and teenage pregnancies might limit girls from going to school at all. Stigma around disability prevents many children from accessing school. We have harmful gender stereotypes that are often reproduced in the education systems because they replicate, of course, the surrounding society, and they disadvantage all children, both boys and girls. And then there's stigma around menstrual hygiene as well. We've had examples also of girls who are being harassed when they're going to the bathroom, for example. So just to say, there's a lot of social and behavioral drivers that impede safe learning and impedes educational outcomes, both in terms of the academic space, but certainly also as a cost for the wider society. UNICEF defines social and behavior change as this. It's an approach that is about empowering individuals and communities and lowering structural barriers that hinder people from adopting positive practices and societies, from becoming more equitable, inclusive, cohesive, and peaceful. If we combine thinking around social and behavior change, education, and violence prevention, it becomes very powerful. We have a huge opportunity to leverage the education sector and leverage education work to address many of these things for the benefit both of academic and wider societal outcomes. There's a very beautiful quote that I've used a lot in UNICEF's strategic plan. Safe to Learn is currently hosted in UNICEF, so we're building, of course, on synergies in the Safe to Learn work around programmatic priorities that are the same for many of the organizations present in the room today. I will read it out loud. Education must become a tool for transforming societies and economies, challenging rather than replicating harmful social norms and gender stereotypes. This combination of looking at the issues from multiple perspectives and addressing them from both academic and societal perspective brings me to talk about Safe to Learn. Safe to Learn was created in 2019 at the World Education World Forum, and importantly, it was an action-oriented response to a youth manifesto where hundreds of young people across the globe asked the global community to, one, elevate the issue of violence in and around school, and two, make prevention and response of violence a priority in education programming. On this basis, the call to action was developed. I'll delve a little bit more into the Safe to Learn call to action in subsequent slides. Safe to Learn is a global initiative of 15 cross-sector partners, some of them in the room today, Joanna spoke this morning from UNESCO. Yesterday, the Coalition for Good Schools spoke. I know all of them are Safe to Learn members that have come together to dedicate their work to end violence in, around, and through schools, both in humanitarian and development contexts. There's also another point I want to mention in terms of this. Safe to Learn basically talks about both ending violence around schools, when children are going to and from school, and online activities, so everything that links around the child's life. Importantly, we also try to use schools as an entry point to reduce violence in other areas of children's lives. So bringing all the pieces together, as so many of the speakers have been speaking about today as well. This brings me to the call to action that Safe to Learn has. It's basically an outline that manifests that we know what we need to do. It's 5 areas that 15 organizations with additional members came together and agreed on and are important to end violence in and around schools. So in this way, they offer a blueprint for what works, and we also have frameworks that benchmark countries in terms of the progress they are able to make around ending violence against children in schools. So we can basically go in very concretely and practically and see whether a country has the measures in place to start addressing the challenge. I'll run through the call to action to give you a few practical examples of the way that Safe to Learn and partners are working to address this. The first one is implementing policy and legislation, which of course is of paramount importance. We have examples from Kenya, where corporal punishment was banned in schools in 2010, and it showed a very clear reduction in the use of corporal punishment. Of course, this would not have been the only intervention that made it happen, but certainly implementing policy and legislation is a very important aspect of taking the first steps towards addressing violence in and around schools. The second call to action is about strengthening response at the school level, the institutional level, basically, because once we put in place legislation and policies, we also need to make sure that our schools and systems are able to implement them. We have a nice example from Cambodia, where teachers are using corporal punishment in schools to a large extent. There's been fantastic work done. The Ministry of Education has been a key role player in addressing violence in schools in the country. And through the implementation of the training package on positive discipline and classroom management, we were able to reduce corporal punishment with a 30% reduction in the use by staff. So this needs, of course, to be sustained. It's examples of schools where it's worked, so it's not as simple, but it just shows that we do have mechanisms and interventions that can move the needle on these different aspects. Importantly, in the example of Cambodia, it was combined, as several speakers, including I know that Joanna also mentioned, we need to put the whole puzzle together. So it was combined with a protect program that engages children's parents, teachers, and community members to also work on shifting social and gender norms and make sure that schools are safe places.
3 minutes, 3 minutes left.
Yes, no problem. I won't dwell into this one, but it's a very good example of institutional capacity building as well in terms of enabling schools to respond to violence. I know you had a presentation yesterday from Hussein from the Coalition for Good Schools. If you haven't attended it or haven't spoken to him, I strongly encourage you to consider this example as a very good practice for institutional strengthening to address violence in schools. I'll move to 2 final examples before I end my presentation. One is in Indonesia, where we were also able to do fantastic work in terms of working with the existing structures and programming and integrating positive discipline in teacher training. Importantly, these initiatives also focused on the role of the students themselves and used social and behavior change programming and approaches very effectively to basically identify change makers among the students, work with the students to develop a policy for anti-bullying behavior, to change social and gender norms between the students themselves, and work with teachers as well to understand how it affects students. It's currently being rolled out many places and has been effective in building strong relationships with school staff and engaging school principals as well as the students together. So the whole of school approach is one of the red threads in this. Like, we really need to work across the different levels. It's like Buch also showed, we use it as well, the socio-ecological model, where we need to go into both the individual, the parent and the caregivers, the community level, the institutional level, and the legal aspects. We need to work on all these different measures to do it. The last example I want to show is from Jamaica, and the picture here is actually from when the children of Jamaica signed up for the Safe to Learn call to action, and the children here are asking the government for the key aspects and approaches that they want them to address in order to address violence in schools. The Jamaican example is also important because it worked as opposed to just the other examples, not just, but as opposed to the other examples on teacher trainings and positive discipline. This example worked a lot with problem-solving techniques, pro-social skills to reduce violence in schools. And there was notable changes found in the behavior of both school staff and students. Importantly, it was also found that teachers felt overwhelmed, and I'm sure it has come up more times, that we're also asking sometimes teachers a lot to change their practices, to do different things. Again, we can do social and behavior change here to better understand what motivates teachers, behavioral insights in terms of like what makes it easier for teachers to pick up on different practices. So we have a lot to learn in terms of doing these different aspects. Finally, I just want to mention the two last aspects of the call to action. The fourth one is on investing resources effectively. We're working with ministries of education and with government to make sure that there is money put behind addressing violence in schools, really leveraging education sector and education funding to address violence, for the sector to also recognize that it is a problem, also for foundational learning and for making sure that children are able to learn. Overall, I don't have to say, I'm sure you both discussed that a lot, it's a scarce field. Resources are usually lacking, so we're really trying to generate awareness of this. And the last point is around generating and using evidence. Safe to Learn, as I mentioned before, has a diagnostic tool linked to benchmarks that basically creates evidence around the progress in countries on addressing violence in schools. We're also working to really advance work on social and behavioral drivers to understand why violence is happening, why are teachers using it, or why are children doing it at each other. We need to answer these whys in order to be able to create proper interventions. And importantly, they can also be an important dialogue tool for action. I should mention that the diagnostic tool actually is there in Arabic. Jordan has implemented it and has also signed up for the call to action, so we can share that. Some of the other resources are only available in French and Spanish, but hopefully we'll be able to translate them. Thank you so much for your time. I'll end with this last picture, which is the end goal that we should all be moving towards, which is happy children running to school rather than running from school because they experience violence.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Désolé, sorry for pressing you. Okay. Je sais que c'est pas facile. C'est pas facile, mais je pense qu'on devait aussi respecter nos amis par rapport au temps.
Very much. Thank you for taking time into account. I would call upon Leila to join us for the next table, and then we'll take some questions before lunch. We'll be taking your questions. Yes, Leila, could you please join us? Take my place, please. We invite Mr. Bilon, Miss Beaumont, Aman Hassoun. Stay, please stay, all of you. So we take 20 minutes before we go. We let you go for lunch.
Then, d'accord. Bon, on va faire, on a besoin d'une équipe. Ouais, si jamais il faut pas, là, c'est je vous ai... Très bien. Là, مكاينش. Là.
Are you all seated? We're back in a better way. So we're back in a better way. So it's a nice photo of family. The speakers from both plenaries. So we keep our promise, and the debate is open now. So we're going to receive some questions. Thank you very much for your understanding. Would you help me, please? To be more efficient, please introduce yourselves before you ask your question, and please say to whom your question is addressed. Raise your hands if you have any questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, not that. So we start from the middle. We are centrist, so we start from the middle. We are moderate, so we start from the middle. We start by the lady. No, not the center, but the lady now. Yes, ladies first. Yes. I think that we'll be receiving questions, and then the speakers will answer. Please, and if possible, please be more precise, and please determine to whom the question is addressed. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, all of you. I'm Malika. I'm an inspector. My question is addressed to Mr. Solomon. Mr. Solomon, the question is addressed to you. You talked about negligence and the postures of attire, and you talked about a lot of details, and that disturbs the teaching. A teacher uncomfortable may not teach well, and that asks a question about the health and efficiency. A beginner, a freshman teacher has multitasking to conduct. How can they pilot? How can they steer the learning towards the learners and share their experiences? My question is, you talked about professionalization of the teachers' corpus to combat all forms of bullying and harassment and ensure their practice as a teacher. What are those approaches adopted? What is the mode of implementing such an element in your country? Could you please tell us about this? Thank you, Rabia Salhi, Association of the Inspectors or High School Inspectors of Morocco. Thank you very much for all the presentations. They are complementary, as I find there are some interaction that happen between them. So sometimes we can ask one question that is addressed to two speakers, and one can answer. I would like to talk about the issue of the emotional skills, and capacity. Claire Beaumont talked about a refusal and also the inability of the implementation or to apply these emotional competencies on the ground. During the training, we develop technical competencies and skills that at the cognitive level, at the psychomotor level. But at the psychomotor level, what have you done to convince all the neuroscientific researchers entail that you cannot change the personality of a child without this intervention of the accompanying emotional skills necessary for the competence of the heart and the soft skills. So that gives the child a sorting out, a classification that is lower to the children who didn't have this opportunity. We start talking about soft skills at all levels, primary, high school, and even higher education. But sometimes there's a retreat from all of that. It's the basis, as I call it. All the words MIUX. So Korea has created a lot of methods to combat against, but we don't have we had a lot of phenomena. We have drugs problems, cigarettes, and so on. And now we have bullying. Nothing worked because we were not so practical, because the methods we try to deploy were not suitable. We need training. training of the teachers at all levels, and we need to train the parents, the students themselves, and all the stakeholders to mobilize all of them because they belong to one sector or different sectors, because they are one of the intervening entities. It's the business of all, and we need to put hand in hand. This group work has to be done to be able to achieve the objectives of eliminating violence. Mr. Jean Bilan, you've mentioned something important of treating the situations of bullying, but at what level do you do that? At the maternal level, at the nursery level, or even or with parents earlier than that when the child was born, at the junior high school or high school? At what stage do you do that? During the adolescence, a lot of hormones and emotions are being produced, which create a lot of damage. So we have to help those adolescents to manipulate their emotions, to come up with clear decisions in their lives, and also benefits the education at all levels. So, a question for Beaumont and one for Mr. Beaumont. Could you please introduce yourselves before asking the question? Beji Amina. Do I take the floor? Somebody behind me. Somebody behind me. Yes. Okay. Benoit Vio. I'm from the representative program of the cooperation between the European Union and Morocco regarding the question of education and training. I would like to, I'm not addressing my question to somebody in particular, but I would like to emphasize one important issue here, which is listening to the victims of violence in order to be able to deal with the question that concern them. All the denunciation or the condemnations and reporting have have to be founded, and most of the cases they are not founded, and we have to be vigilant in doing so and take into account these elements and talk to the targeted individuals who can be considered as a cause of these behaviors, not culpable or guilty, but as because they see this as serious and they can benefit us in something. So we have a prevention program, and this prevention program should be conducted in some cases where they can reduce the danger, but in some cases they can ruin the lives of some through the inappropriate programs and implementation. For example, the case of some teachers who can be the cause behind that bullying, and they can even lead to the death in some cases. So we need to treat this question from the very beginning, especially the question of understanding of the victims on what they do. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the precious presentation, Professor Kharbouch. Thank you very much for this precious, Mr. Kharbouch. Thank you very much for this presentation. I would like to hear you talking about your study compared to the UNICEF and the High Council for Education, and that will be an additional value. As for Hirat, Johan Hirat, you've made my day by your presentation. How can you bring together all these researches, the UNESCO researches, the UNICEF researches, the European Union, and a lot of partners, the decision makers, the Ministry of Education, National Education, civil society as well, which plays a major role, media? How can we bring together and create a synergy and a networking of all these elements, and through collaboration and cooperation to protect against this school or violence in schools? My last question is addressed to Miss Claire. You've presented the project. It's a great project. My question is, how were you able to measure the impact on the ground? And thank you very much. Merci. Wadia Salah Wadia, the floor is yours. Salah Wadia, a member of the High Council for Education. I have a different question to the speakers. Miss Hassoun, you said that the perpetrators using the statistics, does that mean that the perpetrator or the assaultant can change their behaviors afterwards, or the case has been settled in accordance with the example you provided? Mr. Beaumont, this is a question for you. Retributions that have been mentioned by Ms. Hassoun, were they evoked and mentioned in Canada? Did you settle that question? To Mr. Samo, how can we can we change completely the behaviors of some of the perpetrators and cases? Ermat, in the mode that we deploy today that leads to violence, we see a lot of violence on the screens of the phone and the TV. Can we say that the impact of the media will always be important, and how to create a strategy to truly turn the situation down? To Miss Herat, who is well placed where she is in the UNESCO. She talked about the violence everywhere, and she's scratched the surface of an important scratched the surface of a lot of great topics. I would say that the impact of the media is important in this direction. Can we dream together of this complete eradication of violence in schools, which is a space amongst the other spaces in the social sphere? So, Mr. Jamal, I would ask you, Jamal, you were very rigorous regarding towards Mr. Kharbouch, to let him express himself, to reveal the Moroccan experience, this direction, but unfortunately he couldn't present well to elaborate the case. Thank you very much. My thanks are extended to all the speakers. Excuse me, sir. Microphone, please. You have some ideas, and if you ever have anything to add, we're going to give the floor to everybody. The man, the gentleman requested to take the floor. Please go ahead first. I had number 5. I was number 5, so I have to intervene. It's my turn. Thank you very much, everybody. I wanted to seize the opportunity of today to diversify the interventions, especially that we have a diversity of specialists in psychology, psychiatry. Mr. Kharbouch and his presentation was based on a study. I have a question, and the question that remains in my head still is the impact on the one who suffered the violence. Does it have to do with the age? Is it the same degree between the primary school victim and the junior high school and the high school, or is it related to the intensity of the violence perpetrated on that victim, and regardless of the age? Here we talk about knowledge, and then we try to build good public policies. In order to have those good public policies, it has to take the particularities of the age and specifications of those elements. And thank you very much, everybody. So we take the last question in this round in order to be able to answer, and then we'll open a new list of questions. Or what do you prefer? Could you please, I ask the speakers too. We take all the questions? Yes, okay. Who's left? Professor, go ahead. Thank you very much. Sabah Saeed. Peace be upon our Prophet. First of all, join you and agree with you and everything you said over these 2 days dealing with this question of violence in schools. I would like to start my question by something we accept all, as we all know, violence in schools is minimized. Society in miniature reflects what happens or reflects what happens in the big society, which is the international society as a whole, international community. There are a lot of players in the sector of education that agree upon this and try to be patient and bear with it. We follow an approach. We had to follow a holistic approach. It's really complicated, as one of the speakers said, concerning the methodology about the shared concern. We have to take that into account to approach this violence at schools. I would like to add some other elements that regarding what's been presented earlier, and I see them very important. We may make a transition from this phenomena and eradicate it completely from our schools and society, and why not through our efforts. Another factor is that we have contracting aspects. We work with the administration as contractors, so they have to be law abiding, and because they represent a lot of elements that serve or destroy the classroom. They may take it as an excuse for letting those violations continue. The second element is this hybrid procedures or the standards. Those double standards resist the efforts, no matter what their nature and their objective is. We may not be able, as we saw yesterday during the presentations or the statements of the children, we may not be able to deceive the upcoming generation and let them and help them adopt some fake principles. A parent who is instilling violence as a bullying person at home, they are encouraged to do so. So there are these double standards that we witness in our society, even in the international society. My colleague talked about the invisibility. Now we talk this concrete invisibility in our children and the upcoming generation. So we see that in the Palestinian children, what they go through. They are invisible to the world, and we see their sufferings that encompasses all the sufferings, verbal, psychological. They go through all that, and we stand and stare. That's all we can do. The last element is the model that we can set a person or an idea. This will help us to bolster and foster our powers to deal with violence at homes, at schools, and anywhere, and that would have positive results on the society we live in. These are two factors to follow up, to give a follow up and monitor what's going on. These policies that we follow and implement have to reflect or to be reflected through programs, concrete programs on the ground to deal with violence. We have to follow them and monitor them, and also try to see its efficiency. There's another important thing as for the teacher and student is the reporting factor. The student has to be able to report. They may take a direction. They may resort to reporting without worrying or fear, and also the observation or create an observatory. If a child cannot report to us, we have to create an observatory to give them a chance to tell us what happened. So the question number 8. Good morning. Greetings to you all. I'm a coordinator, regional coordinator for philosophy, specializing in philosophy. I'm not going to ask any questions as much as I'm going to react to the presentation regarding violence in schools. I would say as follows concerning this approach. The majority of the presentations, their own, the presenters are thanked, and I forward my thanks to all of them for what they did. Mission accomplished. And the point I would like to raise in this direction and interact with you about is as follows. So the approach of violence in schools can be approached through a micro dimension, a micro sociological dimension, as a social phenomenon. Basically, as specialists and practitioners who have relationships with the schools, we can keep it in proximity or closer to the schools or closer to the hearts of the teachers and all the staff working in school. All the presentations have agreed about one important element that through training or stronger and firm trainings and continuous trainings as well is important in this direction. This approach or approaching this phenomenon is different from its dimensions. The dimensions are multiple, as you all know, and we may not be able to limit them. That's why we need to develop the tools and the vehicles to carry our messages and approaches, and that's why we need the necessary infrastructure to help or reduce or curb this phenomena in schools. And thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we're done with the first round of questions. Now we give the floor to the speakers to answer, and then we'll carry on the debate and discussion by answering. We start first things first. So the high flyers will start first. The good students will start first. Please go first. High flyers, go ahead. Mr. Kharbouch, go ahead. The floor is yours. I'm now under the supervision, moderation of the Professor Bristiman. I'm free now. Thanks God, I'm free. I've made the transition from you, Jamal. I'm free. We are all under the same umbrella. Yes. You see how great democracy is? I'm not going to answer, but I'll interact to three basic or fundamental statements that has to do with the impact of violence on children. This is a fundamental or core question. Why is it different? Why is this violence different from one child to another? There are a lot of factors. The type of violence first is important. The physical violence, sexual and verbal are not different, and neglecting is also different. And the perpetrator, assaultant, from a closer person, a relative, a father, is not from an alien or foreigner, teacher or somebody in the street. So the developmental stages of the children are important. When you ask that question, the question when it happens, the earlier this happens, the more damage it causes in accordance with most of the psychological studies. A lot of approaches work on the protection of children during the first 5 years. UNICEF has a strategy of 1,000 days that can reduce the impact of violence on children. And here I'm going to answer the lady who talks about the emotional part. Attachment, for example, is important to talk about in this direction. In the early ages of the children, they have some parents or one of the parents has a stronger attachment with the child, and this gratification, emotional gratification, goes on, and it provides resilience. So that gives that type of resilience to the child that can face up to the challenge. If they face any trauma, any challenge in the future, they go back to their basis and treat that. A lot of children solve this problem or overcome it, or some fall prey to it or victim to it. These factors explain why some children are impacted more than others. The children who have developed this resilience, how many in accordance, they constitute only 12% among the children. This resilience, to answer the inspector, the inspector asked this question, we can teach children this type of resilience, and it includes even soft skills. And also going back to the psychology, self-development, psychological treatment, and so on. A lot of factors combined. We are able to help children to overcome their impacts. If somebody who suffered from sexual assault, it's like a light bulb that is broken. It's difficult to repair it and bring it together again. Another point is knowledge training that was mentioned by my colleague, the inspector. Some of the problems can be solved through training. Training can solve this problem. Knowledge is the solution for everything. How can we face the phenomena? We have now for violence. We have all the tools to work on the prevention and work on other elements. That we have the qualifications and qualified individuals with credentials to do so. Now, the families whose children fall prey to violence. I'm talking about the Arab region. I'm an expert, and we debated with a lot of experts in this direction in the Arab world. Families do not ask and they don't search any sponsorship or psychological sponsorship of the child. They seek the legal parts. They need medical certificates to go to the police and report that, to arrest the perpetrator, be it a merchant or any person. So they don't know any other type of things they resort to. So spreading this type of knowledge can help a lot. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Kharbouch. So we'll move on. Who's going to take the floor? Beaumont, go ahead. Miss Beaumont, the floor is yours. What we recommend is please take 2 minutes. So I'll be responding to 4 questions at once. So you'll feel that. I'll be so brief. To help create this socio-emotional practice, it was not a project, it was a program. It was not something that was experimental using the data. What I presented was the fruit of reflection starting from the different elements, different things that have been measured, that were measured, the positive impact of the school climate and its result, and to work on the well-being of the individuals and students in particular, to push forward their learning, teachers for their professional development, and this socio-emotional skills were evaluated, and I showed you how we worked in an integrated manner. It was not a model. It was there were suggestions to create a good environment to avoid wasting time going into the details. The same thing. So we worked on the same thing on the children and their overall development, and we work including their mental health, social, scholar, or school facets. That's important. We did all of this to assist and help the children. It was a program. It was not a program. It was not a recipe, but it was in Quebec. We present things, and when we move, we try to transplant that in other countries. We see that it's inappropriate. So we present, it's not necessarily to be taken as good practices. In Quebec, we haven't achieved that yet to share with you. Recently, or last week in particular, the Minister of Education has announced that he has created 7 hours included in the program for the high school level to teach them this socio-emotional. It's been years that I've worked on this. So the training of staff or school staff, I have experienced this direction. I had a pioneering or a steering project that's called Nano Program to teach the socio-emotional elements or practice in nurseries, and we worked virtually. We're not talking about accumulating those trainings, but we're talking about the quality. So training the staff is important, and we have to recognize the quality of those researches and create synergy. This is what have been over 3 years. I'm eviscerated to see people on the ground working, but they waste energy for less results. I've conducted there are some kinds of monitoring that happens through the internet virtually, and the teachers may talk to us, and we open channels of communication. Nano program has been attended by different teachers, and they benefited from that, and they can implement that, and we try to deal with people to present this or to conduct this. I had Georgia and Romania and Francophonie as well, so we have one session starting in October and another that will start once we finish with the subscriptions. So the initial trainings is important. I haven't managed over the 10 years to create a proper or clear-cut initial training at my university. Once there's a space in the program, we try to discuss different elements and try to take the individuals and give an opportunity to individuals to develop in accordance with their need. We let them go as far as they wanted to go. This is an important element. This year, I was asked to create a specific program to assist the teachers to know how to teach these skills in particular. I'll be going back to my university to create a program for the baccalaureate in the form of initial program. It's a win situation. So this seminar is for cross views and exchange amongst ourselves. We have another question that was addressed to Mr. Solomon.
In Morocco, it's like that's energetic.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's good. I like the energy. As I recall the questions that were directed at me, there was something about training of teachers, and it's not really my expertise. I mean, we've talked a lot about ways and how they need training in anti-bullying. They also need training in social emotional learning. But in terms of child protection, I think that obviously we can't expect teachers to be able to protect all children, to prevent cases like Daniel's case. So I would say, let's take the analogy of your football team, because you have an amazing football team. Your women's football team was a world record breaker. And I think that what happens on a football team is the ball gets passed and then a goal is scored. And that is what happens with information about a child that we're concerned about. It's not one person on their own who scores the goal that protects the child. So a teacher may see something, or feel something, or notice something. So that is one pass. The ball is passed to another teacher who also sees or feels or hears something. A student or a parent in the playground may also. So the information gets passed. But obviously this doesn't take place over days. It may take place even less than 90 minutes. You know, it has to be done quite urgently, and this wasn't done in the case of Daniel. And then finally somebody will score the goal, and by that I mean pass the information to the authorities that can intervene. And in the case of Daniel, they should have removed him into a place of safety. Yeah. So clearly that didn't happen. But there is a connection between the school and the child protection authorities, and the question is, how does that final scoring of the goal has to take place? It can't just be the teachers continue to talk and feel concerned, but doing nothing. And there needs to be a procedure that they also write down their concerns so that it's not forgotten. We actually see, I am genuinely worried about this child. I don't know why, but it needs to be recorded. I want to add something to what I said about confidentiality. Confidentiality is crucial because sharing information inappropriately is also a form of bullying and can cause long-term harm. And we know that in Arab cultures, we don't want the neighbors to know our private stuff. I know that's very important. But when you're a professional saving lives, it's like a doctor who does a diagnosis. You can't keep your symptoms secret from the doctor. They won't help you. So it's a need-to-know basis. And so it may be that only one teacher scores the goal, only one teacher may know all the information, the child protection. The other ones may not ever know the full circumstances of the family because they don't need to know. But somebody in the school does need to know and interact with the child protection authorities. Just want to say finally, if I can, because there's a question about how do we prevent child abuse. Okay, sorry. Well, it's a fairly big question. How do we prevent all child abuse? It's very difficult to say, and I will answer it as a social worker, not as a sociologist or a psychologist. So so social workers deal with cases. In the case of Daniel, it was interesting. Yesterday, somebody said that divorce is a form of child violence. Interesting, because in Daniel's case, his parents were forming a team that together were causing him harm that ultimately led to his death. So I think that team that family shouldn't have been acting like that. So the family sometimes does need to be, we do need to intervene in the family, rather than saying that those parents stay together regardless. It's possible that we could have worked with either mum or dad separately, because that relationship was toxic. That family was toxic, it was poisonous, it caused his death. So sometimes in extreme cases, we have to be ready to say, this family is not a functional place for that child. And therefore we may need to work. So it might mean that Daniel, if Daniel had been saved in time, maybe he would go into foster care, maybe he'd be adopted, he'd be brought up by another family. But maybe mum might try again with a new partner who is not as harmful as her previous partner, or maybe dad will try again, and they might be able to bring up a child successfully with the right kind of help. So what I'm saying is that we have to be ready to take all measures if necessary. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to say. Thank you. I'm very sorry.
On the contrary, we must highlight the importance of questions. And probably if we extend it a little for the good cause, it wouldn't harm. There is a lot of importance in providing answers, and I give the floor to maybe. Would you like to take the floor, Mr. Malone? We'll start with Mr. Malone and Mrs. Hassan afterwards. Yeah, afterwards, dear lady from Canada. I don't have much to add as to what the others have said. Another point of importance, I believe the decisive challenge remains training the teachers. Comparison that always comes to my mind is comparison with doctors. As soon as the doctors started existing in the 4th century before our era, doctors worried about giving the oath, Hippocrates oath, that is a value code that was inseparable from their profession, because the doctor's profession is not like any other profession. If my mechanic or my plumber is a pervert, this wouldn't prevent me from taking my car to him. However, if the doctor doesn't have any values and I can't trust him, I'm not going to entrust him with the most important person to me. It would be a catastrophe. And the teachers, how come some in-depth thoughts wouldn't be done about the ethics, morality? The ethics is the same as morality. Isn't it necessary that professors are equipped, armed with an oath, a Hippocrates oath, as the doctors do? That is a basis that would avoid us any kind of negative results. We talked about violence of adults, professors against children. We talked about physical punishment, although it's declared illegal, it continues to exist. I myself, I was beaten by teachers, but if so, as physical violence is no longer there at school, it's moral violence that's exerted now. It's humiliation exerted by certain professors that's quite hurtful of their students. I think things starts here. Education on empathy, it's done first by meeting of adults who are themselves empathic, sympathetic, who carry this basis of values. I'm convinced that the decisive challenge is the training of teachers and professors. And here, this is we need to highlight the ethical and moral dimension. We need to undertake this project. Question: how can we transform the harasser students into an ambassador. It will be our wish to do so. Are we going to manage to reach that? I don't know. But I have some reservation when we imagine when the harasser presents himself as a person with characteristics. Quite often he's a child or an adolescent. I met many of them who are like the others. Quite simply, they are taken or are caught on one side between that is their desire to make others suffer, its will and their capacity to escape with impunity, the impunity of the group. But let's start working on professors and teachers. That would be the essential, fundamental thing to do now. Good. For the question about listening, it's a recurrent question. It's something that has always existed in the people who listen, who listen or who make people listen, and also in teachers, professors, different stakeholders, and different members of the community. The only thing is that the chance, the good luck we have with this method, as it's non-blaming method, when students come to make a declaration, to denounce and to whistleblow, what is he going to gain when there is punishment at the end of the chain? Yes, I'm going to do some whistleblowing. Are they gonna believe me? It would be a punishment. Here, there's nothing to win or gain. It will be sometimes how are going to listen to him. Is he going to be listened to by the team that deals with the intimidators and nothing more? Because in the method and with time, children would understand it. They would know that's a very precious space. There are some at the beginning that find fun using this space to give false information, fake information, but they would understand subsequently that it's a precious space that they need to protect, and that one day they themselves must use it, have recourse to it. It's an element of dissuasion. But afterwards, I don't know if your question it's about whistleblowing on adults. It's true that in our method we don't deal with this quite a lot, but the people who are trained on listening, they would learn with time. When we listen, we do not guarantee anything. We take the time to dissociate, to listen. When we arrive eventually to see if the child is saying truth or not. But this is another part, another side that is not part of the method. But afterwards, I'm going to give you, Mr. Wadia, a situation where our children, the famous harassers, it's a situation that happened a year ago. We had some students. It was a situation that was quite complicated. They filmed another student being beating somebody. The video went viral, and we couldn't cancel the video. And the team started working, and we had to sanction because it's in the school code of conduct, the bylaws of the school. They had to sanction. It was a serious act that deserves sanction because it went far. So they were sanctioned with some works with the victim, protection of the victim, and some work of reparation to vis-a-vis the victim, and also by repairing themselves. A few months later, it's the same group of students who came to see the cell by saying, listen, we are in a situation. There was a video of myself, a student was saying, somebody filmed me, and this video is on the social networks. Now we ask you to treat with these students as he treated us, exactly as he treated us. You have taught us a lesson, we understood it, and now we would like that they would be subject to the same treatment. You have made us understand well that at school when we make mistakes we have the right to repair and to grow. And I give the floor, thank you Amel, I give the floor now straight away to Mrs. Joanna Irat. Thank you very much. It's falls on my shoulder to do all the barriers between you and your lunch. And my stomach also is rumbling. I'm going to answer this question. If I understood it well, can the school change everything? The answer is clearly no. We are not asking for asking teachers whose job is to teach and to change the world and take into charge the whole responsibility of the protection of children. But we have our role and we have part of the responsibility in this. I believe we agree on this. The question is maybe the limits of such responsibilities of the teachers. Obviously, if we were to change the behavior, for example, if we were to look at certain countries who managed to a zero physical punishment, 0% physical punishment, corporal punishment. It's at the initiative of the schools, professors who said we don't want to use this, and it was at the initiative of associations of human rights, child rights, children's rights, that is saying we need to put an end to such punishment at school. It was also the legal framework who said we are going to put an end to this, but at the same time, in the medias and hearing, I live in France, for example. I remember very well 10 years ago, there was an awareness-raising campaign about violence against children within the families, within the households in France 10 years ago, because we always continue to beat children in the household. So we had to carry out an awareness-raising campaign led by the states and together with work with the national education staff, all the different stakeholders in society arrive at the same destination point and say we are not going to use power, force, violence, and submission to elevate our children, be it in the school environment or elsewhere. For me, the school with the other parties of society, and we are not going to put the burden of responsibility on the shoulders of the teachers only, because we know very well they have a heavier burden already, but we know very well that by working with the teachers through trainings which start with, as Claire said, the question of the oneself, this brings another different side of their teachings, that is a way of interacting in the classroom with their students, and eventually we'll see if we have teachers with a feeling that is they are very happy, satisfied with their profession, and students who do better at school. It's win-win situation. Thank you a lot to all the speakers. There is my friend, and please, everybody has disappeared. I am the only one facing you. Everybody has left, so I have the bad role. My sympathy is lost. Please, yesterday Mrs. Reid, I used the please, and now today I'm going to say another word more than please. Let's stop here. Thank you very much, and we conclude on this note. You are passionate, quite passionate, and we end on a wonderful demonstration. Everything we see here, even those who were angry because they couldn't ask their questions, were on a different register. We are humanizing, trying to humanize the educational system. Go ahead. Thank you. The workshop number 3 will be in this room, and workshop number 4 will take in the other building opposite room 4. Thank you.